Hello everybody, my name is Nathan, alcoholic, drug addict, and compulsive gambler, and all around bad guy. Whatever negative, socially unacceptable label you can put after my name, I probably fit the bill at various points in my life. Selfish, self-centered, violent, criminal, incompassionate, menace to society, coward, irresponsible, gangster, the list is a mile long. I was born to two loving parents, both from large families, and I remember being raised by my grandparents. And one day at the age of 5, I found myself at the airport being told that I'm going to America with my parents. I ran away and hid behind a cart, and almost made my parents miss our flight. Evidence that my rebellious nature was with me from the day I was born. If only had I hid it a little bit better, I might not be standing here in front of you today exposing myself. The following is a series of details that I would like to get out of the way before I get into the meat of my story. I remember coming to America and living in a one-room hussy room with a bathroom that didn't have any walls. I remember I used to walk with my mom hand in hand and wait in line to pick up a huge block of cheese, butter, and a bag of beans. Those were happy times. Shortly thereafter, though, the happy times started to slowly become less and less. While my parents were away working, I used to ride my skateboard all over what is now known as Koreatown. I once watched my father get arrested while trying to protect me from an apartment manager who threw a bucket of water on me. I find myself one day being raised by another set of grandparents in a house full of uncles and aunts, but no mom and dad in sight. I remember going to school and not understanding a word the kids were saying, and they all looked a little bit different than I did. I used to be tortured and get beat up by my uncles and their friends because they were just mean. I took that anger from getting beat up to chasing them with bats and knives or any other blunt instrument, and to beating up kids that were more my size. Needless to say, I got into a lot of fights, a lot of trouble all the time, and those early traits followed me through my childhood and young adult years. During the week, I used to walk about a mile to the bus stop to catch the RTD and ride for about 45 minutes to go to school. And when I got home, I roamed the neighborhood streets and parks and played with other kids until it got dark.
You go to West.
Okay. Sorry.
We're slowing you down.
Wrong topic. Excuse me, folks. I used to shoplift candy and anything else I could get my grubby little hands on. On the weekends, I got up at 4 a.m. to follow my grandparents to a swap meet, where I would help them set up our space and sell bread boxes and Silkstream Connect t-shirts. I was once tied up and masked and fell victim to a home invasion robbery one day when I played sick and stayed home to watch TV. I once nearly burned down my grandparents' home while playing with matches, and they threatened my mother and father that they were going to send me to an orphanage if they did not come and get me. I remember taking my first drink of alcohol, and it tasted really, really bad. But after a few seconds, it felt warm and fuzzy inside, and I remember I tried to drink it again. I remember trying to smoke cigarette butts from an ashtray. And I coughed just like I'm doing now. And I coughed and my eyes watered, but I remember trying to do it again. I remember trying to smoke a joint that my uncles had left behind. And it was the same effect as the cigarettes, but I felt a little bit different, a little bit weird, and I liked it. My memory tells me that I was between the ages of 5 and 9 when these events occurred. When I was around 10 years old, my father had picked me up to go live with him. It was a sad moment because I had to say goodbye to everyone, and I'm not one that is good with goodbyes. Apparently, my father had remarried, and he introduced me to my new mother. And it was the beginning of an ugly relationship. My father and new mother made it clear that I was forbidden to have any contact with my birth mother. They even went as far as to hide some Christmas presents which she had sent me. But me being the clever little criminal, I found them in no time. And I used to play with them in the mornings when my parents were away, and repackage them and put them away so that no one would be the wiser. Needless to say, I continued to go to school, continued to get in trouble, continued to get in fights, Continued to roam the neighborhoods until dark, and continued to do criminal acts. The level of severity increased just as naturally as my age and body was increasing. I started breaking into homes. I started breaking into stores. I broke into containers, newspaper boxes. Whatever had money in it, I figured out a way to break into it and take it. In high school, I was living with another family member. My friends and I became more involved in more severe, intricately planned criminal acts. I became involved in gangster environment. Not the type of gangster majority of people these days would picture. I became more violent. I became what we considered as a menace to society, and I was loving every minute of it. Throughout this time, I was drinking, using drugs, and gambling at every opportunity. I loved the lifestyle, the money, the drinking, the drugs, and the gambling and partying was all too enjoyable. Little did I know then that because of that fact, I chased the feeling until it no longer felt the same. Later in my life, it started to feel like a nightmare. I was getting into all sorts of things that you would think a normal kid my age wouldn't even know how to get into. I somehow was able to maintain a C average in school, and I scored high on my SAT exams, and out of a dozen colleges I applied to, I got back one acceptance letter. I want to share one experience I vividly remember, which in one perspective may not be that big of a deal, but looking back on my life, it was a significant event that epitomizes my character and the molding of and my upbringing. I was partying all night, drinking and using drugs, with my SAT exam appointment the next morning at a facility 2 hours away. I remember getting up that morning, eyes bloodshot, still hungover, still dazed and confused, and I was running late. I got into my car and sped off to make it on time. I was traveling nearly 100 miles an hour, weaving in and out of traffic. And after about an hour or so later, I saw flashing red and blue lights behind me. I thought, crap, I'm gonna miss my test. It never occurred to me that I could get arrested. It never occurred to me that I was a danger on the road. It never occurred to me that I was breaking the law. It never occurred to me that I was late because I was partying all night. All I could think about was that I was going to miss my test, and these a-hole cops was the reason why I was going to miss it. After getting my license and information, the officer asked me what my hurry was, and if I knew that I was going 100 miles. I explained to him that I was on my way to take my college entrance exams, and I was running late, and that my entire future depends on me making this appointment, and that I didn't realize I was going so fast. The officer paused for a minute, went back to his car, came back and handed me my license and said, "Slow down, son, and good luck with your exam." I said, "Thank you, officer," and sped off. I broke the law and I got a free pass. I didn't have to be held accountable for my actions. I pleaded ignorance when in fact I knew exactly what I was doing. I manipulated someone's compassion to benefit me. I was ungrateful. These are just a few of the work principles which I live by in my life. My college years went by in a flash. I worked full-time to pay for school and expenses. I loaded 18 units per semester. I partied like a rock star, gambled every chance I had, and my ego somehow was able to inflate larger than it already was. I felt that I knew everything. I felt that I could do everything. I felt that I was better than any of you. I felt that I was in control of my life and everyone around me. I did everything I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, and nothing was going to get in my way. It came as a surprise, but I dropped out of school just after a few years of living that way. I had roommates, I was working, and I was still partying and gambling. I was still the same guy I was in high school, just my environment and circumstances had changed. I thought I was a responsible adult since I no longer associated with my unsavory friends and acquaintances, and that I had a job. Most of my friends, by the way, went to prisons, the military, out of state, and some unfortunately passed away due to overdoses or accidents. I found myself in prison for a year, but at least I was still alive was my rationalization. I felt no shame, no remorse, and no need to change anything. Shortly after, I was able to find another job. I worked for a couple months, and with my last paycheck, I decided that I was going to play poker And a 2-week paycheck adding up to $600, I went to my favorite casino, the Bicycle. I won a lot of money that night, and I went back to my apartment the next morning and made the decision not to go to work ever again. I continued to go back. I continued to win more and more. Through the course of a couple of years, I had amassed a small fortune, as I thought small fortunes were. Digressing a little bit, I remember when I was younger, I was very in tune with my relationships. I had priorities that were important to me. I didn't miss birthdays, I didn't miss promises, and I didn't miss days of work. As my addiction progressed, I started missing birthdays, promises, and work. In any event, with the money I had saved up, I started a business and it failed. I started another business and it failed. I bought an expensive car on a whim, only later to sell it in a few months because I needed the money. I was still partying like a rock star, gambling every day, and my ego was still somehow getting more inflated than it already was. I was totaling cars, waking up in the middle of the street, blacking out nearly every night. Waking up in places I didn't know. I got arrested for a DUI. And one time I found myself in my apartment after a week-long binge, and at a low point where I was denouncing God and praying, if you really are who you say you are, and you're there, please let me die now. I realize now that some of the greatest blessings are unanswered prayers. Hopefully this has drawn a pretty good picture for you of the type of person I was and the life I had lived. Just as most of you here, I could write a book if I were to describe every aspect about my life. So now we'll move on to the next chapter. Flash forward a number of years, and I found myself in a pretty crappy state. But I was trying to recover from all the bad luck in my life. I was trying to stop using drugs. I was trying to get my life back together. I met a girl, and after some time dating and getting to know her, I felt that she was the love of my life, and that I wanted to settle down and raise a family with her, despite the contrary advice of some of my friends and family. She was compassionate, loving, loyal, funny. It made me feel that I was all that mattered to her, and she was all that mattered to me. We soon moved in together, and we had a child. My father taught me that a man only cries 3 times in his life: when he's born, and when his mother and father pass away. When I saw my beautiful daughter for the first time in that delivery room, I cried. I thought of all the great things I wanted to provide for her, and all the love I wanted to show her, and all the wonderful, miraculous things that she could be capable of. I thought my life would be complete, and that true happiness was right around the corner. Unfortunately, my addiction had other plans. My wife and I were somewhat happy, but we were struggling. She was supportive in all aspects, and I took that so for granted. I was so self-absorbed in my business and myself that I began taking for granted the very things that I loved about my wife and child. I began becoming resentful for her shortcomings and continued to look more and more at what she was doing wrong, and not looking and realizing at the things that I was doing wrong. My addiction and character defects quickly blinded me from the happiness and content that I once had, and it turned me into a resentful, self-pitying monster that was under the delusion that I was a victim. I put my wife and child through hell, but all I could think about was the hell that I was in. Fast forward to July 2008. Everything started crumbling down, and I had what some would consider a mental breakdown. And one night after closing up shop, I abandoned my family. I abandoned my friends. I abandoned my business. I abandoned my car on the 7th Street Bridge, along with my life. I found myself with only the clothes on my back and a little bit of cash in the middle of downtown Los Angeles, homeless. The first thing I did was find a dealer. I roamed the streets, digging through garbage cans looking for something to eat, finding used plastic bottles to fill with faucet water, and my basic animal necessities were being met. After a few weeks, I decided that I was going to find some people in the casinos that owed me money. and I became finally determined to do something. So I went to a gas station. I went into a gas station bathroom one afternoon, washed myself up, washed the shirt and shorts I was wearing, and walked out with clean wet clothes on my back, and walked around till it dried off. I finally made it and found the casinos, but unfortunately I found no one who had owed me money from my past. I did, however, meet some of the managers I once knew, and they proceeded to give me casino shirts and jackets, food to eat, and a wish good luck. For those of you who've known me in the past couple of years, that would explain why I have so many Hustler and Hollywood Park shirts. I continue to live on the streets, under bridges, in alleyways, in the LA River, under the rafters of the Hollywood Park Casino racetrack. And every couple of days I will go get washed up in the casino VIP lounge with the help of some supervisory managers. And I had a meal. Where was I? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Can't forget that.
Sorry.
I had a meal to eat. Sure beat eating semi-rotted trash can takeout. I lived this way for a few months, and then I decided to move to another casino, like I was moving homes. And there I met a friend who was now the director, and he allowed me to stay in the hotel casino, and provided me with food and a few bucks here and there to try to pick myself back up. I used to sit in that hotel room, looking at a picture of my wife and daughter, trying to find some sense of emotion, some type of wake-up call, some glimmer of hope. I couldn't even manage to drop a tear. I went through this homeless period without any hope, without any feeling, without any happiness, without any ambition, and no clue as to what my future had in store for me. I was an animal. My only concern was where and when I was going to get my next meal, and where and when I was going to get my next hit, and where and when I was going to die. And then in stepped God. It was April 2009. Coincidentally, that's the month my daughter's birthday. She's having her birthday today, by the way. Or next week. I had met a longtime friend in the casino, and basically he told me that he would send me to Alaska to work. In the meantime, he asked me to quietly stay at this place where he knew someone, and that I would need to wait a few weeks until the Alaska deal fell through. He asked me to meet this man and tell him my situation, and to give him a call and let him know when everything was settled. And then in stepped Dr. Hall. I met Dr. Hall in a Starbucks coffee shop one evening, and he drove up in a Corvette, a white one. It was nice. We sat down and he proceeded to inform me of HOT and its purpose, and that it was a full house and there was one bed left. I remember telling him that I didn't feel comfortable taking a bed if it meant that someone who might need it more than I could not be accepted. Looking back, it was basically my roundabout admission that I was not a full-blown addict. I came into the house, regardless, and everyone was weird looking. Everyone. And I was uncomfortable. I was different than these people, I thought to myself, and this is not for me. Not even taking into consideration that being on the streets was not for me either. One of my many character defects, not being able to find gratitude, always feeling that I could be better and that I deserve better, and not being able to realistically look at my situation. I was introduced to the 12-step meetings and the steps. I was introduced to God. I was introduced to addiction and the process of recovery. I got a job and money. I got a little vehicle. I got some new clothes. I got some motivation and ambition. I gained a lot of insight and valuable knowledge. I left HOT shortly thereafter. And shortly thereafter, I became homeless again. I came back to HOT a second time. I was reintroduced to the 12-step meetings and the steps. I was reintroduced to God. I was reintroduced to addiction and the process of recovery. I got a job and money. I got a bigger vehicle this time. I got some new clothes. I regained some motivation and ambition. I gained a lot more valuable insight and knowledge. This time, I felt that I could get it right. I left HOT a second time shortly thereafter. And once again, shortly thereafter, I found myself checking back into HOT. Again, I was introduced to the 12 step meetings and the steps. Again, I was reintroduced to God. And again, I was reintroduced to addiction and the process of recovery. And again, I regained motivation and ambition. And again, I gained even more valuable insight and knowledge. I basically had 3 years of my life pass by, and I ended up exactly where I started. All the experiences and knowledge, money, jobs, whatever, didn't amount to a damn thing. I was no better than who I was 3 years before, if not worse. There was one major difference, however, this time around from the previous 2 trips. This time I honestly asked myself, where did I go wrong? Wasn't the sober time and things I learned enough to make me a better person? And the final question, what is more powerful, knowledge or action? And for the first time I opened my eyes and realized that all my knowledge didn't amount to a damn thing because I never rigorously applied it, any of it, to any substantial action. Action for me is change. I had to change the way I thought, change the way I felt, change the way I react, change the way I make decisions, change every part of me that paved the road for me to end up the way I had. And I began to take that knowledge that I gained, and I took action. And in order for me to thoroughly take the correct action was to become brutally honest with myself. And I basically had to look at myself from the outside in, just the way I would look at someone else and pick out their flaws. That in of itself was a sobering experience. I finally was able to gain a clear perspective of who I was becoming, and who I wanted to be. I want to let all of you know that in the early stages of my recovery, I was still totally dishonest, still angry, still ridiculously competitive, still resentful, still selfish and self-seeking, still arrogant, stubborn, unsatisfied, lazy, lonely, shameful, anxious. I had low self-esteem. I still felt that I needed to hide things from you. Still felt that I needed to present myself to you, that I was better than who I really was. Still felt that I was different from other addicts out there. And I still felt that I was in charge of my life and I had the right answers. The reason for all this is, as they say in the AA Big Book, I had a diseased mind and a spiritual malady. Although I was introduced to God, I did not wholeheartedly follow Him, and my perception of Him was totally in left field. And here's an example of that. There's a guy that I've heard about through other people. Some good things, some bad things. But I never met him in person. One day I happened to run into this guy on the street and say hello. I take a quick glance at his clothes, his demeanor, and decide to myself that he's not all that he's cracked up to be. And we part ways. And I just run into him every so often. I don't have his phone number. I have no interest in hanging out with him. Don't know anything about who he really is. One day I find myself in the middle of nowhere with flat tires and no tools to fix it. Not a person in sight, and my phone is dead. Well, all of a sudden, here comes this very same guy. He shows up and lends me the tools to fix my tires. Gives me a phone number and tells me, "Be careful, friend, and if you ever need some help, or need someone to talk to about anything, give me a call." I gave him a call and began to have a relationship with him. I started to see firsthand what an awesome guy he really was. He guides me and shows me a proper way to feel and live my life. He comforts me when I'm in pain. He gives me answers when I'm lost and confused. He calms me down when I get angry. We laugh together. We cry together. He is my confidant. He is my teacher. He is my friend. This is my God, and I will be eternally grateful for our relationship, because without it, my life would not be the miracle that it is today. I want to talk about the 12 steps of recovery and how it worked in my life. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. When I drank, used drugs, gambled, I could not stop even when I wanted to. I ended up abandoning my family, friends, my life, and I was homeless, with nothing to show for it. I think I qualified for step 1. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. Living the way I did was not sane, but that's all I knew how to do, and I needed someone or something to show me a better way, because it was obvious I couldn't do it myself after all these years. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood it. When I do something, I have an expectation of the results, and the results are not to my liking. I tend to take contrary action in hopes of getting the results that I wanted. I had to give up what I wanted. I had to give up trying to manufacture results. I had to do what God would like me to do, and even if I don't understand it, I had to accept that the results are up to Him and not me. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This step was an eye-opener for me. This is where I learned to become honest with myself, call myself on my own crap, so to speak. This is where I stood accountable for my character and past harms I had committed. This was where all my character defects were exposed. And this was where I had now a clearer perception of how to change for the better. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. This step was an action step for me. It was a relief step for me. It was where, for the first time, it seemed, I was able to be honest with God and another person. It was where I was able to experience what it's like to not have to hide something, which was a liberating moment. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. This step was where I became ready. I lived all my life with these character defects which had harmed not only me, but everyone around me. And it was time to stop hurting. And God was the one I believed that could take them away, one by one. Step 7, humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. When I used to pray and ask God for something, especially when I was in trouble, I would pray like this: God, I'm screwed. You need to help me, and you need to do something about this, please. Not what I really consider humbly asking. These days, I pray and ask Him in this manner: God, thank you for having me and giving me opportunities to do your will. But I find my shortcomings getting in the way a lot. Please help me and remove these character defects from my heart and my mind so that I may better serve your will. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. This step was where I learned to become accountable for my actions and where I learned how to be understanding and compassionate towards others. Whether it was when I was living in active addiction or whether it be right now while I'm in recovery, I found that I needed to apply this principle in my life in order to get out of myself and stop looking for a free pass. Step 9, made direct amends wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to prove our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. These latter 4 steps are pretty self-explanatory. They are action steps for me to apply every day. And these 4 steps are the basis of my daily recovery process. I used to think that recovery was all about time sober and getting back the things which I lost because of my addiction. And although this is true, and it certainly will be good enough for me, here's a miracle that is happening. Recovery for me are those things, and even more awesome than the fact that I'm getting the things that I never had before, and cleaning out the garbage in me, due to my addiction. I never had real significant principles in my life. I never had real peace in my soul. I never had pure compassion for others. I never had true honesty with myself, God, and others. I never had real acceptance, and I never ever had any humbleness. I never had any gratitude. I never had any true joy and happiness. I never had the power to do the right things, especially when it meant that it was going to be difficult. I never had true clarity when it came to living my life, and I never had God. And these days, I have less anger, I have less resentments, I'm a little bit less lazier, a little bit less selfish, self-seeking, less arrogant and less stubborn. I'm less impulsive and I'm less closed-minded. The list can go on, and again I emphasize the word less, because I'm not perfect. I'm just striving for progress and not perfection these days. And my life is nowhere from being comfortable in the picture-perfect life that most of us have, believe you me. But recovery has afforded me a new life, a new perspective on life, and a newfound taste for life, which I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. I no longer blame my past, blame my family, blame this world, blame my addictions for my problems. I have a beautiful, loving wife and daughter sitting here today, and that wouldn't have been made possible if it wasn't for God and the 12 steps of recovery. I have a great relationship with my mother for the first time, which wouldn't have been possible if not for God and the 12 steps of recovery. I have a great relationship with all my fellow brothers and sisters, and that's thanks to God and the 12 steps of recovery. I have a new life which I'm discovering and grateful for each and every day, thanks to God and the 12 steps of recovery. I'm for the first time in my life at peace with myself, others, and this world, all thanks to God and the 12 steps of recovery. And not to leave out another important key, this fellowship has played an integral part in my recovery. I wouldn't be here if you weren't here. I'm honored to travel this road of recovery together, hand in hand. And lastly, I'm forever grateful for all the faceless, nameless people out there that support us with their prayers, with their hard-earned money, with their compassion, only for the sole purpose for us to live a good life, a God-centered life. Thank you.